Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Freight Forecasting. I'm your host, Michael Vincent. Never thought I'd be saying those words after the first one. Welcome back to another edition, that is. But seriously, thank you for all your comments and suggestions and so on that you've been sending me through LinkedIn and other media. I appreciate it very much. Lots of positive feedback, and I'm glad to hear that. If you're new to the show, the purpose of the show really is to go through freight forecasting, what it is, why you should be freight forecasting, how you should be freight forecasting. Level 100 course through 400, grade school through PhD and beyond. So with that in mind, kind of the cadence of the shows are starting to fall into order. We went through the whys and the different data sets and different BI tools, et cetera, that you can use or need to use to be able to freight forecast effectively, and along with who should be freight forecasting. And then we worked really we brought in our lead economist, and we brought in a couple experts to go through different areas of the economy and the freight markets, different data sets at a very high level. And so now it seems right, and from the comments, to kind of level set a little bit and go through the base, the 101, the really important surface, easy to use data sets with some BI tools. I use Sonar, obviously, FreightWaves. So we'll go through some of those. I'm going to do some heat mapping to show you high level where you can see exactly where there may be issues within your supply chain, or where there are hurdles or opportunities if you're a carrier or a freight broker or a shipper. And then we'll break it down into some, build out a market table and do some charting and things like that. And if we have some time, we'll dig into some other cool ones and give you a preview for some other shows that'll be upcoming that we'll get into a little bit deeper into the UI. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. We'll resume with some more guests next week, but today we're going to level set and go through those building charts and building heat maps, at least utilizing Sonar. If you have your own BI tools, you might want to be thinking about these type of things, how to visualize it and how to go from very high level C-suite, if you will, what is going on today, all the way down to the data quants and digging in what is actually happening. So from the perspective of short-term or monitoring what is going on in the freight market today and in the short-term future, that's where we're going to hit it today, kind of 101 type of stuff. So let's dive in and take a look at my Sonar dashboards here, and I'll start building out some charts for you, and we'll talk about the different data indices. So when you first come into Sonar, you see some global pages, but we'll save that for another time. What I'm going to do is, in my pages, I'm going to build a couple pages for you. I'm going to start out with a heat map. And by doing that, I bring myself a new blank dashboard. And you can see on this map, you've got the United States. I can drill down into this and look at it a little bit closer. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some layers onto this map and kind of paint this core pleth here. And what I'm going to put in here is the outbound tender rejects, or OTVI, or outbound tender volumes, excuse me. Outbound tender volumes. So what this is doing is this has painted my map and showing me day over day what the change has been in volume of outbound or tendered loads, truckload, both or all three, flatbed, dry van, and refrigerated. And this is showing you the volume by market, and it's showing you currently where these stand, the heaviest volume outbound. So you can see where there are loads in the country, which is interesting. But what you can also do with this visualization tool is add a second layer to this, which gives you a height. And if I hit this advanced features, I can go in and put what we talked about before, O-try, or outbound tender rejects. Now, outbound tender rejects, as we talked before, is really the capacity's reaction to those volumes. Is there enough capacity there? Do carriers have other options than to carrying that freight? So it's the effect of that volume on the capacity, supply and demand. And so when I put these together in this map, and let me just close this, when I put this together in this map, you then get to see this height in these markets, which represents O-try, or the rejections. So the blue is telling me that there's a lot of volume coming out of these areas. These are the deeper the blue, the more volume is coming out of there. There's lots of loads coming out of there. The height of these markets is giving me a signal as to, is there capacity there and are loads being rejected? The more loads being rejected, you have upward pressure on spot rates, you have dropped loads, you have shippers falling out of their routing guides, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not high analytics for you, but it is a really good way to have a quick understanding of what's going on across the country. And further to that, you can visualize this in several different ways. Let me see if I can get this. Here we go. So what I can do is I can show these things a little bit different here. If I go into my custom layers, I can throw up locations for a specific company, all my assets, and then I can see what's going on in those different markets exactly according to where my facilities are in these markets, and I can see what's going on. So this gives me an indication of, okay, this is happening over here in this particular market, but what is actually happening in my market over here in Louisiana? Or what is happening in my market over here? And if I click on these, I can quickly click into that market and then be able to start to dissect it from there and start to chart it out, et cetera. We'll dig into that in other shows, and the need to be able to quickly and easily dig in and see exactly what's going on. We'll do that a little bit later in this show. The point here is that you quickly have this easy way to get an overview of what's going on for your entire system, whether you be a shipper or you're a broker dealing with specific customers. You're a managed transportation provider, so you can map this out by different customers and see exactly first thing in the morning exactly where those markets are that may be in trouble for those shippers that you provide services for. So where do you focus first in the morning? Or if you're a general broker, where are those opportunities? Where are those areas that are going to be issues today? If you're a carrier, where can I get loads? And if I have assets in this area that does have loads, what is the rejection rate? So what is my relative bargaining stance, et cetera? And shippers looking at it from the exact opposite standpoint is, where are those issues going to be where I may be falling out of my routing guide? Now, if you're freight forecasting and you're utilizing tools, you know that this is coming, hopefully, if you're forecasting correctly. But it's still this quick, first thing in the morning, what changed overnight? And you can also set alerts if you have the proper tools. Setting alerts according to what these changes are for the key metrics that you identify is important. So, I can wake up in the morning and look at my phone and see alerts on different markets as I'm having my coffee, and have a decision made by the time I get to the office what is going to happen and how to respond to those different disruptions or opportunities in my supply chain. So that's one way to do it. And quickly, let's move on and build another one. I told you I was going to build some market tables as well. That's a heat map. There's different ways to do it. You can paint different data sets on there if you want to. We're staying 101. Volumes versus rejections. Supply and demand. What is going to be the effect on your business due to those factors and the changes in there, the volatility of those different data sets. So let me add another page here, and we'll just call it MW for Market Watch. Let me save this here, and then I'll show you how to build this really, really quickly. So a market table, what this does is gives you the ability to select markets in the United States. Now, you can select all the markets in the United States, or you can select just those markets that are important to you. We'll select all because we don't need to. We're gonna look at some different markets around the United States. So what I do here is I hit that. I hit Manage Symbols is what I did. I named this Manage Symbols. Brings me up all the data sets that are within my my library, if you will, or inventory of data sets that I want to look at and I want to analyze to see what's going on in these markets. And so I come down here, and I have these are organized very, very well inside here, and I know where they're at. In your different BI, I would suggest that you organize them very, very well, so you can get to them, obviously. But most popular trucking indices, and what we'll do is we'll paint this with outbound tender rejects. And right here you can see that I have the ability to look at Canada, region by lanes, the regions, national, by state, again by lanes, or by the specific markets. And if I hit this plus sign, you can see that I have all 135 markets in the United States. I can select any combination of those that I want to. For these purposes in building this, I'm just going to select all of these, add these symbols, done, save. And I've got OTRI listed out for every single market. It's telling me exactly what happened overnight in those markets. It's giving me its current value on the bottom and the change from overnight. Now, OTRI is telling me and will tell you that capacity is tight in that area. Now, in order to understand what that actually means, you also need to have your volume on there. And so I can adjust this by adding volume onto this by just going back in, managing my symbols or tickers, coming back down, and I know that my volume insights for this particular one is under most popular trucking indices. So I can open this up and I can look at the outbound tender volumes. And now what I have built, if I select all markets, like you should, add those, done, and save, is now I have a market table of what we were just looking at in the heat maps. A little bit more detail. Now in those heat maps, you can hover over and see the different values, or click in and dig into a specific market. This gives you a little bit quicker and easier view of actual data and what is going on. So it's telling me what the outbound volume has changed, where it specifically is, and what the value of the OTRI is, as opposed to that quick symbol of dark blue and high height in that market would tell you that there's an issue going on there. This is giving it to you in a different visual with the actual data. So if I look at this and I start going through these, what is interesting here is I look at this and I come down to, and I'm looking for a specific market. So Raleigh right here, if I look at this, the outbound tender volumes, or the number of loads overnight in Raleigh, has gone up 3.5%, which puts it at a 45.71 index for outbound volume. The rejections dropped by 0.4% in Raleigh, and it's at a 6.64. So I'm looking at that, and these colors to me I look at this, and once you're looking at this long enough, you see colors. Reds and greens will tell you issue, non-issue, or issue based on your perspective, shipper, carrier, or intermediary, right? So looking at it that way, you see that there's really not much going on in this market. I mean, tender rejections dropped by 0.4%. That's good if you're a shipper. Outbound volumes went up 3.5%. Nothing to write home about and go crazy about if you're a carrier or an intermediary as well. Things are okay in this market right here. But if we go into and add more tickers, which you should, which I preach on every show, is you need more data and a good way to visualize it to understand what's going on in the market, we'll see something a little bit different. So if I go back in to, and I should really show that, let's save this real quick just so you see what I'm doing here. I go into this tool, which is kind of my edit tool for this particular market table. And it brings up this. I hit my manage symbols, and I come down, and I find some additional tickers to add to this. What I'm looking at is we put in the most popular outbound tender rejects. We put in the tender volume. Market share, some people like to use. We're not going to use it for this particular example. Head haul, which is giving me the ratio of inbound and outbound loads. Head haul meaning much more outbound than inbound. Back haul, much more much more inbound than outbound. So I add all these markets in here for the head haul. Let's add that to this particular market table. Save it, make sure we have those, and we do. So now we have haul, OTRI, and OTVI. We're getting a little closer to what we want to see here. Go back in, let me manage this, and let's take a look at what's going on the inbound side, because that is always important as well, to see what is the movement or relative movement of capacity over time, and what is it going to do over the next week. What are those trend lines to see? Is this rally really just kind of a flat market and nothing, or is there something to be concerned about? So I look in here and I look at my trucking supply and demand, and look at our inbound tender rejections, and we'll add those for every market in the United States. We'll add those, and then we'll go back in, and we'll go back to those, to the market volumes, and we'll add the inbound tender volumes as well. So we have those. And let's take a look at the market that we have here. Let's look at this market table that we have. So now we have our haul index on the left-hand side, which is telling us the change or relative change of outbound to inbound loads, that ratio. And so a 3% uptick in Allentown means it's moving more towards a head haul market. It already is a head haul market with a 36.62. As opposed to down here in Amarillo, where it went up 15.6% towards a head haul. That doesn't mean that Amarillo is a head haul market. It's still a negative 5.83. Not a huge backhaul market, but it certainly isn't a head haul market. Then I have my I-try next to that, are my inbound tender rejects, which is telling me the number of loads or the willingness of carriers to accept loads into that market. And I see that Allentown, that has gone up as well. I see the ITVI, or inbound tender volumes, the volume of loads in, has only gone up 2%, and the O-try has dropped, and the outbound tender rejects has dropped 7%, and the volume is relatively flat. So in Amarillo, it's a loosening market is what is happening here. So carriers are willing to take shipments out of there. The inbound volumes are relatively flat. The outbound volume is pretty flat. It's a relatively stable or normalized market, or it is level. So if I go down and look at Raleigh, which we were looking at earlier, and I excuse the trending, but now we see a little bit of a different picture going on here in Raleigh. We were looking at the outbound tender volumes up 3.5%, and we were looking at the O-try at minus 0.4, thinking, okay, it's relatively flat, stable. Okay, but haul went up 144.4%, and the inbound tender rejections went up 2.9% to 5.67. Still nothing to really get excited about. But if we go and click on one of these and quickly take a look at this, this might be a market we need to watch for a little bit. Here's your outbound tender rejects in the Blue Mountain, and you can see they started to rise and then they fell off, and they've flattened out here over the last day. If we put in the inbound tender rejects and overlay that, we see that inbound tender rejects have been rising since back here in February 5th, dropped off a little bit, and now have bounced back up again. Again, interesting. Outbound volume or outbound tender rejects are still above inbound tender rejects. So it is not a tightening capacity yet, but you see that there is this closing a little bit right here. Let's add another chart to this quickly by clicking on this menu of our widgets and click on a chart, and it'll put it next to this. We'll gain a little bit of real estate by moving this one over. And now we have the chart we just built right here with the outbound tender rejects and the inbound tender rejects. Now let's take a look at the outbound tender volumes, or the number of loads coming out of Raleigh. And we can see that those are spiking and have been growing since, let's click this so we get the date right, since the 21st, which was my birthday, by the way. Happy birthday to me. But they've been growing a little bit since the 21st, and then through the weekend, and now are starting to spike up. If we look at the inbound tender volumes to see what capacity is doing on the inbound side for Raleigh, we see right here, and let's zoom in on this one a little bit closer, you can see this gap starting to happen right here. They had been growing, they're here, You've got outbound growing. Now you've got inbound starting to drop off. This is a market that I'm not going to say is crazy or you're in trouble right now, but this is a market where I'm definitely, if I'm interested in this market, I have interest assets, I have shipping plant, whatever, I'm going to set alerts on this market, and I'm going to go into my alert management system, and I'm going to be watching this market, because if this continues to widen or stays this way, this will flip. And these outbound tender rejects will start to go up. So this is a market that I'm not ready to tell my bosses or tell my planning people that, hey, you need to get into this market and do something right now. You need to start getting on the routing guide right now and securing capacity out for next week, or we need to actively start jumping out of our routing guide and securing capacity before spot loads go up. If I'm a broker, I'm not looking at this going, man, I can get some great margins here. I'm not running here if I'm a asset provider to jump into the spot market yet, but it could be next week. I'll be watching this through tomorrow and through the weekend to see what occurs, because this could be interesting. This is one where we may be catching something on the bubble. Now, quickly, what I'd like to do is move over and take a look at oh, I wanted to take a look at another market, excuse me. So let's close this, let's do this. And I wanted to look at the Chattanooga market, if I can find this really quickly. It is where we're at, but I was doing this for a major international shipper today, through the last couple of weeks. And I'd like to show you, I could just pull up a chart and start going through it, but I'd like to show you how I found it through looking at the market table would be better. So just give me 1 second here to find CHA here. As I go through these. Where are you, CHA? See, I use the entire United States, so I look at these to just find interesting things. If you were interested in CHA, I built out dashboards that showed this particular shipper every one of those markets on just a market table, so it was only looking at those that they were interested in seeing. But you can see just all the different markets there. Here you can see Columbus is just on fire, both inbound and outbound. Columbus, Ohio is. CHA, here it is. So the head haul index, 31.8%, 17. Inbound tender rejections have dropped a little bit. The volumes are dropping. Outbound volumes are up 3.9%. And the tender rejects outbound are up 8%. This has been an issue for this shipper for the last week and a half when I first built this, and we've been working together to look at different plans to be able to combat this. So if I look at this OTRI and I quickly map this, you'll see what I'm talking about. You see this huge spike, and it started right here where we're looking at this. If you look at the inbound tender rejects on top of this, you can see that inbound tender rejects were rising, pulled this north, dropped the inbound tender rejects as more inbound was coming in there, but then started to spike, which caused this to pull up. Now, this in particular did not pull it up this high this quickly. It would be rare for something like that to do that, but if we add another chart, I can show you what was going on. Excuse me. I could show you what was going on in the volume side of things for Chattanooga that caused me to look at this. So OTVI.CHA spiked. You see this huge spike that happened right here. And if I look at the inbound tender, you can see that it stayed down and actually started dropping, causing that huge spike. So we saw this coming last Wednesday, Thursday, and that shipper was able to take action right away and save themselves from falling out of their routing guide this week through the early part of this week, and save them some cost and save them service, maintain product on shelf is a main plant for them. And we had those hurdles covered. Now, if you look at it from a shipper's perspective or from a carrier's perspective, you would have known that this market in particular would have been a great market to have some assets in, as the capacity was eaten up during this incredible spike that occurred over a few day period. So that is really just a quick 101 on the basic indices within Sonar: the outbound tender rejects, the inbound tender rejects, the outbound tender volumes, the inbound tender volumes, the haul index. These things all interplay. You can look at outbound tender rejects and see them spiking, and yes, that does mean that there is upward pressure on spot rates. But further to that, looking at those different data sets and trending those out, once you've got that alert, that's a high-level type of alert, and you know what's going on. But digging in, you can see, is this trend moving now? So nationally, OTRI is pretty low. Capacity is there to handle volumes. But there are micro markets, and in the different markets, they react differently. And so there are hurdles that will happen, and there are spikes in pricing that are going to happen, and there are drop loads that are going to happen, and there are opportunities for shippers and carriers to happen if you're watching these things and if you're forecasting for the short term, meaning monitoring what's happening today, what is going to happen tomorrow, and what is happening over the next week. You can take advantage of these things. You can avoid those hurdles. You can avoid those supply chain disruptions. Make sure your product's on shelf, and make sure you don't lose your costs in this market that really is pretty flat. But when you look at the different markets, it can get crazy sometimes. So you got to be monitoring everything at all times. You can't sit back and just say, well, everything's loose, everything's good. Nope, you're going to get caught with your pants down. So hopefully that was helpful. Keep your comments coming back. Next week, I'll have another guest on. Thursdays at 4 o'clock, Freight Forecasting with Michael Vincent. Peace and love. See you next week.